Yes. Okay, so greetings again, everybody. I am Kai Morgan from Jamaica, president of the Jamaican Psychological Society, and representing CanPA today for this session on racial justice. So we are very excited to have everybody here, and we are going to be talking about racial justice today and Indigenous healing tomorrow. So you'll hear some more about that. I'm just going to give you a little bit of information about CanPA. It stands for the Caribbean Alliance of National Psychological Associations, launched in 2013, and really is about advancing psychology, which of course includes research, skills, practice in the service of the Caribbean region and for Caribbean well-being and development, while also addressing like professional interests of psychological practitioners, academicians, and researchers, right? So we're trying to kind of build a community, a Caribbean psychology community, to develop a psychology discipline that pertains to and addresses relevant issues and realities in our Caribbean, and to support the development of the discipline throughout the whole entire region. So we are here doing this today in service and in support of the Caribbean Regional Conference of Psychology, which is a biennial event. Did not get to have it this year, of course, like many people haven't been able to, but we are on next year. So you'll probably hear a little bit more about that as well. So we do have standing committees on CanPA that also support the regional development of psychology, education, training, growth, and again, general development. And so it is an organization of national psychological associations. So we have about 13 member countries, territories in the Caribbean that are members of CanPA, including Jamaica, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, Grenada, and others. And we also do have a grouping of individual psychologists in a Caribbean country or territory where there's no national association, which form what we call CADIPSych. So that's our introduction on CanPA. I wanted to go over a few details regarding our time. First, remember to have your speaker, your view on speaker, so that you can see who is talking with all of us here. And all of you are muted, as you see. And if you have any questions or any comments, somebody will be keeping track of those in the chat for us to address. So please put them in there. Use the everyone chat, of course, for general messages, and for personal messages, you can send to one person only. Following the presentations, the presenters are going to answer some questions, and then we're also going to do some breakout room activity afterwards. So that's our plan for today. So I'm going to introduce a little bit our speakers, and we have this message from the governor of the U.S. Virgin Islands, where our conference will be next year. So you'll hear that now. In a couple minutes.
Welcome to CanpaTalks. I am Albert Bryan Jr., Governor of the U.S. Virgin Islands. As you know, the CRCP conference was scheduled to be hosted on our beautiful island of St. Croix this year. But as in many of your locations, the COVID-19 pandemic has changed our plans, but definitely not our enthusiasm. We are excited about this year's CanpaTalks because it will allow us to keep the conversation going about issues that concern us all: racial justice in the Caribbean and Indigenous healing. Please engage fully in the virtual sessions this year, and thank you so much for attending. And yes, we are even more excited to know that the local organizing committee, the Association of Virgin Islands Psychologists, and the regional organization of CanPA continue working together to bring a world-class conference on St. Croix next year. Please plan to attend the CRCP 2020 Plus, Caribbean Resilience, Psychology's response to historical contemporary disasters from November 17th through the 20th, 2021. We want you to leave St. Croix refreshed and inspired and ready to take on new endeavors at home. On behalf of Lieutenant Governor Trikenza E. Roach and the people of the U.S. Virgin Islands, we look forward to meeting you next year. I wish you much success with CanpaTalks.
All right, give thanks. So now I will introduce to you the speakers, and then I'm just going to ask them to go ahead as we go through. We'll just move along from one speaker after questions and to the next. So first we have Christopher Charles. Chris is a professor in political and social psychology in the Department of Government at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus. And he operates a psychology consultancy in Kingston. He did his doctoral training in psychology and political science and holds a PhD in psychology from the City University of New York. Before going to University of the West Indies, Dr. Charles worked at the Ministry of Local Government, Youth, Sports, and the Ministry of Education, Youth, and Culture. He also taught at St. Hugh's High School in Jamaica, John Jay College of Criminal Justice of the City University of New York, and the King Graduate School of Monroe College in New York. He's a psychologist at Psychotherapy Associates in Kingston and a senior research fellow at the Caribbean Institute of Mental Health and Substance Abuse, Carimensa, UWI, Mona. So that is Christopher Charles. You know, I think I'm going to do it one at a time. Let me leave that right there so that we can absorb each person before they speak. So Christopher, we invite you to go ahead with your presentation. Don't forget to unmute your mic and share your screen.
I'm going to share my screen. I hope it works. I think I'm having challenges. I will just go ahead. I've entitled my talk, Freedom and Racial Justice. And the reason for this is that we cannot understand racial injustices or the need for racial justice if we do not understand what Amartya Sen calls the unfreedom. And so freedom is very much tied to the notion of racial justice, racial injustices. So I'll start with a historical background, arguing that we are the products of historical forces. And there were brutal colonial encounters from the French, Dutch, British, Spanish, and the English in the Caribbean. And the captive Africans worked on commercial plantations throughout the region. The Africans, when they were brought forcefully to the Caribbean in particular, and the Americans in general, resisted. They resisted violently and they resisted non-violently. And in the Caribbean, the captive Africans participated in over 70 uprisings between 1622 and 1822. So we can speak of the 200-year war of the captive Africans and the European colonizers. And I'm talking specifically about the English-speaking Caribbean. So it's much more for the wider Caribbean. At emancipation, the Africans left the plantation in droves. So when the enslaved were free, the majority left the plantation. And this pertains to the larger territories. And this action was very based on the size of the territory. In small islands of the Caribbean, the free Africans had nowhere to go. So in terms of, moving far away from the plantation, so they continued working. But in the larger territories, in the Trinidad and Tobago, in the mainland territory, like Guyana and in Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and so on, the free Africans refused by and large to work on the plantation. And this led to the planters recruiting indentured laborers, Chinese and Indians, in order to save the colonial economy because the Africans by and large refused to work for them when they got emancipation. We also see throughout the region various riots and rebellions. And one noted period in the English-speaking Caribbean was the disturbances in the 1930s, culminating in the 1938 labor riots, which spawned the Moyne Commission and universal adult suffrage and the trade union movement. So that sets the background, because a lot of what is happening now is a reflection of what happened in the past. If we look at what is happening now, we realize that most of our laws in the Caribbean came from, we inherited them at independence, right? In the Anglophone, Dutch, Spanish, British, French, English Caribbean, most of the laws were enacted during colonialism and they were inherited. The policing strategies and the means of social control were also inherited. The school systems were also inherited, where if the school started in the colonial period and it's a traditional school, these schools that started from the colonial period have more prestige and status than schools that were created after independence. If you look at religious institutions, African-centered religion, Santeria, Mayol, Obia, Voodoo, Rastafari, all these indigenous religions are at the base. They have very low status today. And the more established religion, in particular, Christianity and the various denominations have high status. If you look at language, all the nation languages, all indigenous languages tend to be stigmatized in favor of the dominant language, which tends to be English, Dutch, French, Spanish, depending on which Caribbean territory you're living in. So we're talking about the legacies of colonial domination. Also rampant throughout the region is skin bleaching. So we see large numbers of people throughout the Caribbean lightening their complexion. So there's an issue where, as a part of the colonial legacy, we privilege people with light complexion in the Caribbean. And there are instances of racism, and the images of beauty is normally Eurocentric. Also, despite the fact that in the Caribbean territories, non-whites largely control the political system and the culture, the economy is largely controlled by whites or browns, depending on which country you're in. So a major legacy of colonial domination that we find today is miseducation. Large numbers of our people know more about Europe and North America than about our own history. And that comes through miseducation in the media, in the families, and more formally in the school system and so on. So those are some of the legacies or exemplars of colonial domination. So when I talk about freedom, I'm thinking about freedom in relation to dealing with racial injustices, freedom in relation to repairing the breach, freedom in relation to dealing with, to provide racial justice. So we are politically independent in the Caribbean, but are we really free? We have to see freedom beyond the absence of bondage and coercion. We need to see freedom as enhancing the capabilities of our people to deal with racial oppression within the Caribbean and outside of the Caribbean. And here, I'm borrowing Amartya Sen's Nobel laureate in economics. I'm borrowing Amartya Sen's notion of freedom, which is enhancing capability. And if we want our people to be free, we have to work collectively throughout the Caribbean. And we have to demand and lobby and put pressure on our political leaders to enhance the capabilities of our people by the provision of economic opportunities, healthcare, education, security, housing, entrepreneurship, and so on. So here, enhancing the capabilities of people in these areas will lead to real freedom. Why do we need this? Why do we need to do these things? The economies of the Caribbean are largely controlled by whites inside the country and whites outside. Africans and browns control medium and small sized businesses. It would be an error to say that blacks own nothing in the Caribbean. The professional class, the doctors, the lawyers, the engineers, the surveyors, the accountants, the nutritionists, the psychologists, and others own businesses based on their professional expertise. And medium-sized businesses and small businesses are controlled by blacks. But the core sectors of the economy tend to be dominated by whites. So we need to increase the numbers of our people in business, in entrepreneurship. Also, we need to be strategic or use what I'm calling strategic leverage with the International Monetary Fund. Why am I asking for strategic leverage with the International Monetary Fund? Let me give you a quick context. During the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, small countries like those in the Caribbean used to play one superpower off against the other. They were trying to exert their influence, or they were exerting their influence, and they wanted countries in their respective camps. So what countries in the Caribbean did, they would play one off against the other. Some smaller Caribbean countries today do the same thing in terms of getting money from Taiwan versus mainland China. So what am I arguing here? China is a rising world power. The US basically feels threatened in terms of its geopolitical interest and its influence in the Americas. So this is a fact, and so we have to engage the Americans because they control what happens to us when we engage the IMF, when we enter agreements with the IMF for macroeconomic stability. Why am I saying this? The International Monetary Fund functionally is racist. And it is racist in that the conditionalities that it puts on countries that are largely black, these conditionalities are different from the conditionalities, say, that are Greece would be asked to go through or to do in terms of economic reorganization. And they would deal with, say, Iceland differently, right? In the financial crisis, they deal with white countries differently. Just like how the Marshall Plan, out of which the IMF came after World War II, dealt with the countries of Europe differently. And as soon as the IMF started to deal with countries that were majority black, the conditionalities of the International Monetary Fund became onerous and repressive. So we need to use our strategic leverage. There's China, there's the US. We need to approach international technical bureaucracies, knowing fully well that if we're not treated well, there is China, there is Brazil, there are the BRICS, those countries that can provide support for us. We also need to deal with racial injustice by teaching entrepreneurship in schools and provide more support for indigenous entrepreneurs. Why is this important? You cannot fight white supremacy and white racism if you're economically weak. So we need to get more of our people into entrepreneurship and provide support for them. We need re-education. We need to teach about Marcus Garvey in schools And we need to spread Pan-Africanism, where all people of color, all non-whites in general, and blacks in particular, should forge a common bond. We have a common history, common oppression, and similar levels of development and similar challenges. And we are being bombarded by major powers. So we need to join forces so we can chart together a path of liberation and economic development. We also need to look at the laws inherited from our colonial experience and how they can reform to meet the needs of our people. We also need to legitimize indigenous religions. We also need to think about racial socialization. We're all born physically black, but not mentally black. A lot of us think that being black or identifying as black is automatic. It is not. All blacks are born physically black, but not mentally black. And we have to teach our children, our students, what it means to be a black person in terms of embracing a black racial identity. And we can think of nigressence, the process of becoming black, where my advisor or supervisor in the United States a long time ago, William E. Cross Jr., came up with the framework of nigressence, or does one become black? We have to understand this so we can educate our neighbors, we can educate our relatives, we can educate our children, we can educate our students that to be black, one has to embrace it, and there are ways to do this. Also, arising from this is a notion that to deal with racial injustices, we need a strong non-white identity, a strong non-white racial identity. Or if you're black, you need a strong black racial identity. Why is this important? This is how we deal with oppression and racial injustices. Because this approach does not buy into the notion of deficit, that oppression makes you self-hating. No, what we know from social psychology is that by and large, oppressed groups retreat into their culture as a protective filter, as a protective barrier to deal with racism. So this is how I'm arguing that we should deal with racial injustices and co-opt racial justice by enhancing freedom or enhancing the capabilities of our people in the Caribbean. Thank you. That's it.
Yes. Mute. Okay, I'm unmuted now. Okay. All right. Give thanks, Dr. Charles. I think that you did a very succinct job of giving us, like bringing us through the importance of the Caribbean history and how it has led to the colonial legacy. And we heard about that and the unfreedom, the concept of unfreedom and what it requires. And so we heard about needs from a political framework, from an entrepreneurial framework, from the leverage with the IMF and indigenous entrepreneurship and nigressence, the process of becoming becoming black, essentially, because it's a process for us, as you mentioned. So we thank you for that, and we do have a couple of questions in the chat. One person asked about hearing about what books or materials can you recommend for a starters pack, if you will, on Jamaican historical context on this topic? He's muted, somebody. I think you're muted. There you go.
The Jamaican historical context. Carl Stone has a text about race and political ideology in Jamaica that he wrote in the 1970s. The The title of the book is escaping me. I now realize that a large part of literature that I tend to read in terms of books on race come from the United States. That's where I spend most of my adult life. But in terms of other books, there's a book, Becoming Rasta by Charles Price. There's Rastafari and Resistance by Horace Campbell, and so on. So there are a range of books that one can read, and a lot of it, and I'll just take one up right now. Obia Race and Racism by Eugene O'Neill, and it deals with the oppression of indigenous religions in the Caribbean. So there are books on Rastafari. There are books about African religions. There are books about slave resistance. And a lot of the work in terms of Black resistance and identity, they are more in the form of journal articles. So Kai, if I'm missing some of the classics, please jump in. But you can give them my email and I can send them a list of readings. So
yes,
if you want a list of readings, just email Kai Morgan and I will send to her the list that I normally circulate to scholars in North America who request these, and then it will be sent to you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. There's two more questions. One says, I would love to hear more on the perspective of, quote, born physically Black but not mentally Black, because this has contributed to a Black hierarchy against African Americans.
Thank you very much for that question. Let me put it in context. When our late mother asked us to come and live in the United States, we didn't want to go, but my brother and I took about 4 or 5 years before we even sent our birth certificate to the United States, because we didn't want to go to live in America. But you, as boys, you can't really hide from your mother for very long. You can't resist your mother for very long. So we went to live in the US. And when I got there, I started experiencing racism, but I still realized that because I was a Black immigrant, whites, they were treating me awful too. But it's like they were sending a message, you're better than African American. I picked that up. Although I know that in New York City, whites walking with their dogs are more important than all of us in their worldview. And because I'm a Galvite, I embrace African American and I took on that identity. So even though African Americans define the African American identity as having descent from slaves, enslaved people in America, I understand that. It was never offensive to me, so I embraced it. And if they said I'm not, well, I said, okay, I understand, I am Black. But I always work with them. But to get more into the question, because of our experience in the past, the colonial experience, we don't teach our children to be Black. We teach them to be good in terms of behavior, to do well in school, to be a good Christian, to be a good girl, to be a good boy, to become a productive adult in society, but we do not teach them to be Black. Our children are not going to be Black unless they are racially socialized by us to be Black.
Right.
This lack of racial socialization, especially among continental Africans and among Blacks from the Caribbean, put us in conflict with African Americans. Because when we go to live in America, some of us tend to think that African Americans use every site as a site for resistance. And they're sensitive about race. They are not sensitive about race. From they're in the womb in America, they're experiencing racism. If you are from a Black majority Caribbean territory, you are not going to understand race and be sufficiently sensitive to oppression like African Americans. They live it every day. So yes, we need on this side, in the Caribbean and in Africa, to racially socialize our children, to understand what it means to be Black, and to understand what it means to connect with all our brothers on the African continent and in diaspora, because it is in coming together we'll be better able to deal with white oppression. So yes, there's a hierarchy, but it arises from the fact that some of us from Africa and the Caribbean were not taught to be Black.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. As you were mentioning that, as well as the concept of Niagara Sense, and I think another book we could add to that list, you probably have it on your list, is Shades of Black by William Cross, which really explains this physical to mental Blackness kind of, you know,
I didn't
journey.
Because I was asked about Jamaican books, but that's
right. No, yes, absolutely. But just because she asked that question, you know, it's more clearly explained like that. And in the Caribbean, we have some nuances that are different, you know, so definitely.
He was my advisor, so not to even think of that book is sacrilege.
Yes, for sure. Okay, so okay, we're gonna move on to the next presenter, even though I see, let's see if I missed anything. I think generally, maybe I'll allow this one to go because I think 2 or 3 people asked this question. Basically, what are some of the ways to help our children to develop a strong racial identity? How do we teach our children to be Black?
Okay, all right, quickly. So as not to take up a lot of time. The first thing is you have to tell them what racism is. So I taught my son about racism. He's an American living in Jamaica. And he said, oh, you mean those stupid whites who do mean things to Blacks? And I said, yes. So the awareness that it exists and that you're going to experience it when you go back to live in America, you're going to experience it. So one, you tell them that, look, I mean, you're going to experience this and there are ways to deal with it. And each of us, from our experience and from what we know, we can guide our children. Also, we have to expose them to Black books, all books, reading in general, but there are books about us that you should expose your children to. You should also expose them to Black institutions, meaning that whether it's culture, music, culture, whatever it is, Black religions, when you expose them to things that are Black, without you even telling them, they are becoming Black. Also, develop a sense of connection within your children and your students that they are connected to all Blacks, that there is a global Black racial identity or a pan-racial Black identity. So you have to show them that what happens to the Africans in Nigeria with NSARS is the same thing that are happening to us in Jamaica in terms of police brutality. Might not be to the same degree, but it's the same kind of repressive system we have that was inherited from the past. The same things that are happening to African Americans, not in African Americans, not to the same degree, but there are glimpses of it throughout all Black majority countries. So we have to show our children that we are connected to all Blacks, to humanity in general, but to the oppressed group. And this is what happens, and this is what we can do. So educate them about being Black, tell them what it means, let them read on Blacks, expose the Black institutions, Black values, and let them know about Black leaders and Black successes and so on.
Excellent, excellent. And somebody added in the chat, you can also teach Marcus Garvey in the Jamaican school curriculum. Should have more emphasis on that. Okay, yes. Thank you very much. It was a powerful presentation. We're seeing lots of congrats and enjoyment on the piece. So we give thanks, Chris. We give thanks. Okay, so we are ready now for the other panelists that we have. Phaidra Alliance Larac is next, right? And so I'll talk a little bit about Phaidra, and I'll remind Phaedra and everybody else in this panel, the rest of this panel, that you have 5 minutes, right? So, so Phaedra is a psychologist, holds a master's in personal development and family studies, specialization in addiction treatment services, couples therapy, and EMDR therapy. In addition to the marginalized group of drug users that she works to raise awareness among other vulnerable populations, students, young people living in the streets, earthquake survivors. Her main concerns revolve around poor access to graduate programs, supervised internship, the practicum opportunities, improving ethical behaviors, informing and raising awareness of the importance of psychological support. She has put in place several training documents and led workshops and group therapy sessions. She's also volunteers providing mental health care in emergencies following natural disasters. She offers services in Creole, French, and English. Phaedra is also a founding member of the Haitian Association of Psychology. Currently, she is its president. She has participated in the organization of local and international congresses from this perspective. She's also a founding member of the Association for EMDR Haiti. And additionally, her association is a member of CANPA, and she is the co-chair of the Professional Practice and Standards Committee. This is Phaedra.
Good evening, everyone. Okay, I'm glad to be with you. Just checking my microphone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I wanted to congratulate Dr. Charles really for the presentation before I go ahead with mine. I wanted to begin with a little piece of my story. Like, as a graduate student, I live in Reno, Nevada, which is the so-called West Coast of the US. And as a student, I had quickly become acquainted to international students. My first month there, I went to a pharmacy with an Ethiopian friend who had already lived in the state for a couple years. And I asked a question to the cash register and he does not answer. In my mind, I'm convinced that he did not hear me. I'm really convinced that he did not hear me. And as I'm about to repeat my questions, my friend goes, "He's a racist." I wasn't wired, like being born and raised in Haiti, I wasn't wired to see a race issue whenever I wasn't served appropriately or whenever I was treated differently. And I wasn't sure either at this point that I wanted to believe like every time a person of a different race would address me in a way that was inappropriate, that would be because of my skin tone. So that was very new to me at the age of 24, thinking racism at that level. It even shocked me further when I was acquainted to that Native American friend when she told me she knew exactly her blood quantum. So she knows she was a quarter Washoe Shoshone. She knows the different tribes that were in her blood. And the reason she had to know them is because to be entitled to some services and privileges, they had to know where they came from and all the different tribes that was in their genetic form. So really that was big culture shock for me because I wasn't used to really labeling people for the race, how much of this they had of this race and of that race. So that was my first really hard shock with what race was and how people could be discriminated by race. Like I said, being born and raised here, I was more acquainted to colorism. But of course, colorism, the fact that people would have some privileges or had to be discriminated based on skin tone, it all originates, like Dr. Charles said previously, with slavery. We trade from slavery. In Haiti, we were colonized in 1492, pretty much the same time in the Caribbean. First influence was Spanish. And then second influence started in 1625 was French. And at that time, like we all know, it probably was the same experience for all, like French colonists were supposedly believed to be superior to the slaves that were coming from Africa. And then a few years after, when they started like having intercourse with slaves and masters, they started having babies that were lighter skinned. So mulattoes were also believed to be superior to those that were born from both slaves that were originated from Africa. And then the story continues. There became that superiority from those who were born in France and those who were born in the colony. So it's really a long story establishing that where you came from and your skin tone could make you superior or inferior or have some privileges or lack privileges or being a priority in the society based on your skin tone. Yesterday, November 18th, marked 217 years of La Bataille de Vertières, which was the really big fight that led to our independence. And this fight, at the end of it, we became the first Black independent nation and the oldest Black democracy. You will find many Haitians to be very proud of being the first Black independent nation. But despite of us being free for this long, it's like a lot of us still live very insecure with who we are, who we represent as a nation, and what our worth is as far as human beings. Some of them are very insecure about their social origins. Like I said before, from were they born in this place? Do they have lighter skin? Their social and economic status, their skin tone, here and also in the diaspora. Some of you might remember like the very first highly publicized case of a Haitian racism in the States was that of Abner Louima. It was that Haitian guy in New York who was aggressed and abused by police officers in 1997. So that one was widely publicized and it was a whole fuss about that situation. But despite all this situation and the poverty going on in Haiti and sometimes unrest, people still strive to go to these countries and flee Haiti for better life, opportunities, for better quality of life. So they still flee and go to countries where they are not always welcome or where they feel inferior, like it was said like in the times of colonization. Haitians are often believed to be xenophile, and because of that, they tend to expect the same acceptance from people from other countries. And also, I think like in one of the answers of Dr. Charles, they keep that category level that if you are born in Africa, like you are inferior. If you're born in the States, they don't identify as African American, but if you're born in Haiti, it's like you have a different value based on what origin of Black you tend to be. So they still have that mindset going on that pretty much creates discrimination, creates a sense of superiority, a sense of inferiority. So to continue along those lines, in Haiti, with colorism being so big, some people identify as Haitian when we're here. But with the different skin tones, some of them go to a different country and they can't really relate to any race. And they have identity issues because people do ask them, where are you from? Are you Latino? Are you Indian? Are you white? Are you? They can't always identify, whereas it wasn't an issue where they were living in Haiti. They were used to that race issue, that colorism issue, and now they have issues identifying when they leave the country. Because of that, I think it has created a culture of lack of self-esteem. It has also created a culture of sometimes being very hostile, because they do generalize in a sense that if you are lighter skin, people take you as a whole, or lighter skin people do this, lighter skin people think they're superior, darker skin people think they're that, darker skin people think they're that. Because they take it as global, there are good things for some people who are lighter skin the same way there are bad things. So there are pros and cons, both sides. Let's say fast forward 2020, you might be pre-approved for credit at the bank because of your skin tone. At the same time, you might also be charged more money for something that someone with a darker skin tone wouldn't be charged. You might go in areas and they would not let you in. You would literally be aggressive. They would literally become aggressive with you because they tell you the wrong color for this area, because they believe because you're this color, you have more, you have done this, you have done that, so you're not very safe or very welcome in some areas. So it's not colorism. Some people tend to believe that because you lighter skin, you have all the privileges, and because you darker skin, you have no. Being lighter comes with privileges. It comes with pros. It comes with cons. Being darker skin comes with pros, and it comes with cons as well. So I have given the examples of credit. People standing in line, they would probably just come and get you at the back of the line because you're lighter skin. They would probably ask you to wait because you're darker skin. So all this is going on, still going on at the time. And my piece, I wanted to center it around really mental health and differences. Some people tend to talk laws, justice, and government. This is true as well, but I believe as psychologists, it's always important for me to start where we are and to start with what we have. And as psychologists, I believe we can make an impact in a sense that I think mental health professionals have done a very good job shifting from mental disorders to mental health, where we have, I believe, succeeded in stop seeing people as a label, like what their disabilities are, and mostly now celebrating their differences and what they can do despite this disability. So we're going, even with cases of autism, we are now emphasizing what is it that they can do? Where can they be successful? So I think we also have a say because we were successful in the mental health department, and because people with low self-esteem, people who feel like they are less of a person because of their race, because of their color, I think we have a contribution. I think there's a way we can set the tone for, if not racial justice, but at least acceptance. So people become less aggressive, people become less entitled because of their skin tone. And also the work I believe that can be done is that we cultivate our differences and celebrate who we are, and really see those differences as really a spectrum of people, but not as privileges and disadvantages. And as psychologists, I believe we have done the work in mental health, and I believe we can continue with that because we have access to the suffering, we have access to the distress. So I think we are a voice to help bring that racial justice like into life. I think that's pretty much it. And like I said, it begins with us, and it's good that we begin where we are before we get to the broader general society. Thank you. I can hear you.
Yes. Give thanks, Phaedra, for bringing us through that. And I really like the variety and the diversity that I think we're hearing and we'll continue to hear, which is our CanPA MO, if you will, right? So we heard Jamaica, we've heard Haiti. We're gonna go in a minute to hear Puerto Rico and Cuba. So these are many perspectives. I have a couple questions in the chat. One comment, and I think a lot of people will relate to this. Both Christopher and Phaedra have spoken about it, and it's the culture shock that you have when you are, because you're not taught about race in schools in the Caribbean, and then you go to the States and you realize. So this Anne is commenting that she also had this experience when she migrated to the UK as an adult, and it was a shocker. And myself too, same thing. And when I went to school at 17 in the States, the same thing happened to me. So I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that. So, so there's a question that someone is asking, I think it's Gerda Nicola. Do you think we need to get rid of the DSM or the ICD-10 as it is based on a Western perspective? What are your thoughts on that, Phaedra?
Okay, I don't know if we need to get rid of them per se, but because the people studied there and what they call the norm is mostly Westerners, like we say. I don't know if we need a particular different one, but I think it needs to be adapted, if I can say it like that. Because one of the things that stayed with me at the CRCP in Jamaica is that as a like African American in the States, we're overly diagnosed with paranoia because they were scared for their lives. But the thing is that these young adolescents live in areas where people were getting shot every week. So I think we need to be mindful of that. And if there needs to be a reference book that is based on the realities of the Caribbean, why not? Because we do go through different realities. And one funny thing I like to say is that sometimes when I'm very hot, some people really dress conventionally, always wearing stuff. I'm like, if I had to wear this all the time in Haiti, I think I would become very aggressive because when I'm hot, I don't feel comfortable. And I don't know if people would have to label me violent, that I need to take some layers off. And once I take some layers off, I'm good. So I think we do need, on a more serious note, we do need to take in consideration the areas, like what's very specific for a region before we can call it a disorder and a not disorder. And I'm going with something very specific. If we take like alcoholism, codependency, the studies are done with societies that are very individualistic.
Yes.
So when you tend to take care of your family, be very community oriented, you kind of come off as very dependent, effectively dependent. Whereas the way we live, it's very much normal to be worried about family, to be worried about your loved ones. So the extent to which it's diagnosed in a Western community should be different for a Caribbean community because of the way we live and the way that is acceptable and comfortable to us.
Yes, great points, great points. That was Anne's question, by the way. Sorry, I didn't realize it was Anne's question. So thank you for that question, Anne, and for the response, Phaedra. And I'm hearing this last question. We're going to get to you, for you, Phaedra, is can you speak briefly about the racial tensions between Haiti and the Dominican Republic? Oops.
And that also, from the outside, when most people look at it, is general, but it's as much a skin tone issue and an economic and social status issue. Some people would cross the border and never get some sense of discrimination, but some others would cross the border, even if they speak a little Spanish, they would get that sense of discrimination. So it's about their economic status, their wealth, what they represent. That's one of the issues. But there can be at times a lot of tension between those two countries that are on the same island. But like I say, some people out of solidarity, they would not travel to the Dominican Republic, but it's not systematic that every Haitian that would travel to the Dominican Republic would get those racial profiling. But from the borders, we identify as people who come to work on land, just like we were at slavery. So some of them, because of their economic conditions, they are still associated with slaves that would still work on the sugarcane fields and populate their environment with not much knowledge, not much education. So I think that's the issue at stake there. It's a trade issue, it's an economic issue, it's a skin tone issue as well, but it's not generalized to every economic status like of Haitian and Dominicans.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Give thanks, Phaedra. I'm gonna move on now. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. I am going to introduce our president, actually, our CanPA president. That is Guillermo Bernal. He is our president, as I said, of CanPA. He retired from the University of Puerto Rico some years ago, the Rio Piedras campus, where he was the professor of psychology and the founding director of the Institute for Psychological Research. His work has focused on research, training, and the development of mental health services responsive to ethnocultural groups. A lot of his work is focused on the efficacy of interventions in the treatment of depression in Latino adolescents. A primary area of work is in conducting randomized clinical trials on culturally adapted treatments for depression in youth. He's an early contributor to the dialogue on cultural adaptations of EBTs and their relevance to ethnocultural groups. Since 1992, his team has generated evidence on the efficacy of culturally adapted CBT and IPT, carried out translations and development of instruments, and published on factors associated with the vulnerability of depression. His framework of cultural adaptation that considers culture and language has served as a guide to many in the field of psychotherapy research. He's published numerous articles in peer-reviewed journals, chapters, and 9 books, maybe more by now. Bernal is a fellow of APA Divisions 45. I don't know if you still are. This might be a little dated. He's an APA Council representative for the Society of Clinical Psychology. He's received a number of awards, including the Society of Clinical Psychology Stanley Sue Award for Distinguished Contributions to Diversity in Clinical Psychology, and the Inter-American Psychology Award from the Inter-American Society of Psychology. This is Dr. Guillermo Bernal. Welcome, Guillermo.
Thank you. I think I have to reduce that paragraph a bit, but thank you for the introduction. For me, it's a pleasure to be here with you and to serve as your president of the Caribbean Alliance of National Psychological Associations. This is really a dream come true in terms of having these CanpaTalks and having all of you present, participating in this conversation and dialogue. For me, it's music to my ear. I wanted to share with you some ideas about how I view the field in some ways. I'm originally from Cuba and grew up in Cuba, and when I was 11, we moved to the United States, my family to the States. And I brought with me a stamp collection, which was really my transitional object. Had a stamp collection of Cuban stamps. Of course, I was fascinated with the revolution and with the beautiful stamps that the revolutionary government was putting out. And that was my transition. And I kept in touch with what happening in Cuba for many years, until this day, actually. And that was early 1960s or so. So I became very interested in Cuban history. For example, in 1868, that was a key moment because a large landowner, whose name was Carlos Manuel de Céspedes, liberated the slaves. He had a huge, in Spanish we called it latifundistas. So he liberated the slaves, and he of course liberated the slaves because he wanted the slaves to fight the Spanish, and he was into defeating the Spanish army. Well, when you think about that, when you read that, when I read about it in the history books, and then you think about what it means to be fighting, to slaves, to be fighting with machetes against an army that is fighting with guns and bullets and rifles. It's genocide, actually. It's horrific. but that's not written in our history books, or at least the ones that I read at that time when I was a kid. And so he gets Manuel de Cephas gets credit with so-called freeing the slave, but not for the genocide committed in that supposedly freeing of the slaves. And many, certainly many things, many horrific aspects of that war and that so-called independence. The war actually lasted 10 years. So it ended in 1978, actually a little bit later. But by the time 1995 rolled around, the United States was attempting, had its eyes on Cuba, and they eventually invaded in 1898 with the Maine being blown up and with the Hispanic American War. That then led to many years of Cuba being under U.S. dominance, and a number of changes in the Cuban government, all the way through Castro. So it's been Cuba was basically a pearl for the United States. The United States intervenes easily 7 or 8 times at different moments in the Cuban history. In 1902, 1898, 1902, all the way to the Bay of Pigs invasion. So we have a situation where the conflict, the Cuban Revolution, in an attempt to seek greater powers for its country and for the people in Cuba. Whatever you may say or may think about the revolution in Cuba, when I was growing up as a kid, I was actually quite enamored with the was called at that time the rebels, or the rebeldes in Cuba. So when I think about racial injustice, the greatest injustice in my mind is slavery. And that, when I say that, I can't fathom what that is like, or what could be like for a whole class of people, not just the United States, but also in other parts of the world. And I think it was 10 years ago that I went to the African American Museum in Washington, and actually read part of the Constitution of the United States, which I had never really read before, and was blown away by what was written into the Constitution on slavery, Jim Crow, and so on and so forth. I mean, So for me, slavery is one of the greatest evils that humanity has done to its own people. Um, and that's why we need to fight and reverse one way or another. That is, in my mind, the greatest racial injustice that a people can do to another people. Um, in the last several years, with the George Floyd situation, the barbarities of the so-called President of the United States, the situation has gotten so polarized in the United States that, and that together with the pandemic, where do you go? What country do you go to? If you could, or resist and try to make changes. I think we have major challenges ahead of us to try to bring together a common discourse, which I believe it may be possible to do. But so I think we have great challenges ahead of us in terms of racial injustice. And I think CAMPA is one vehicle to address those kinds of injustices. And hopefully, with the support of all of you, we can make a contribution to those injustices in our Caribbean.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. We give thanks, Dr. Guillermo Bernal, Mr. President. Thank you very much. Are there
You're welcome.
any questions? I don't know if I missed anything in the chat. I don't think so. But we thank you for that, for bringing that perspective. So we've heard around Jamaica, African Americans, and Haiti, and the Cuban perspective, which I think helps to kind of round it out. I think our last speaker, that is Alberto Cobian. He is also from Cuba. He was not able due to some difficulties technologically and getting into Zoom, as he's in Cuba, was challenging. So he did a video for us. So we have his video to show in place of his actual live self. And there he is. All right, go ahead. You can go ahead with it.
In the Caribbean. As you know, RacialJstice in the Caribbean. As you know, Cuba is the largest and biggest country in our Caribbean area. We are part of this region, and as part of this region, we have the same history, the same roots, the same troubles, and social troubles. The slavery market definitely our life as people, as nations. First, the slavery during the Spanish political domain as colony, and after as a new colony during the North American domain with a Cartoon Republic, with an excellent but inactive constitution, because the rulers did not want to do anything, just protecting the privilege of the rich class. Only with the Cuban Revolution, the racial problem was considered as a priority trouble to solve. Many executive orders were established with the intention to push out the racial discrimination, doing effective the letter of the Cuban Constitution in January 1959. Our universities, since this moment, started to be full of Black people, not only as students, but also as professionals, as professors. The beaches and the social exclusive clubs were opened to the Black people, to the poor people, to the farmers that had been isolated for the social that they have. The numbers of visits couples rose exponentially, showing that we are a half-caste people. Many things have been changed in Cuba, but do those changes mean that the racism as a social phenomenon have been eliminated of the mind of the Cuban society? Evidently, no. In that order, we continue working hard to eliminate any kind of discrimination, including racial discrimination, as a big and important social, cultural, historical, and psychological tool. In fact, the president of Cuba, Miguel Mario Diaz-Canel Bermudez, is on the head of the National Governmental Commission, a charge to deal with all the problems concerning raciality and racial discrimination. This is an expression of the importance that our state and government attribute to these affairs. We have won a lot, but we have still plenty work to do. Then we are working through those pathways. Racial justice in the Caribbean. As you know, Cuba is the largest and biggest country in our
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay. Well, we give thanks, Alberto, and I will just try to sum up his message because I saw somebody put in the chat that it was really hard to hear the video. I think generally Alberto was talking about racism in Cuba. He mentioned that it's a disease and it needs to be addressed, and talked about racial discrimination. He also mentioned that the government seems to be committed to dealing with this issue of racial injustice and racism, and so that there are efforts that are happening. So there's some progress has been made, but there's a lot of work to do still. I hope I did justice to the summary of it. So, but this is a recorded session, so you will have and can have access to it to maybe be able to hear it a little bit more clearly next time. And sorry, we can't have questions for him, but we had to work with the technological issues. Any questions or comments for the speakers? Anybody have any more questions before we do the breakout rooms? Or any questions from the speakers as well? Any speaker wants to ask another speaker questions or anything general?
Yes.
Yes.
I didn't put my slides on the screen, but teaching about Marcus Garvey in high school, in high schools in Jamaica and elsewhere is very, very important. In the 1990s, the government of the day approved a curriculum to teach Garvey's in the Jamaican schools.
Mhm.
And it was ignored. The very teachers who were supposed to be teaching the Garvey curriculum refused to teach it. So when we talk about teaching Garveyism in schools, we have to think about going to the teachers' colleges.
Mhm. Mhm.
The teachers in their training have to be taught about the importance of racial identity for oppressed groups and the importance of the connection and working together and the cooperative survival mechanisms that are available.
Yes, yes, definitely agree with that, Chris, definitely. Thanks for that. Anything else? Or can we go ahead and go into our little breakout rooms and have some discussion? Yes. I think our trusty, handy Gerda is ready to do that.
Absolutely. We just want to say thank you so much, very much for all our amazing speakers for those wonderful comments and words. The next part of this is really an opportunity based on what some of the things you've heard to get into a smaller room, to have larger, some conversations with each other around some of the things that you heard, some of the reasons why you came for the talk this evening. And there will be somebody in that room who will moderate that session for you. And so in a minute, I'm gonna open up the room. You just have to say, join your room. You'll get a notice when your room is gonna be closed. And so your time there is about 20 minutes for those of you who will be participating in it. This is a chance to network, get to know each other around this particular topic as well. So I hope you will join one of the rooms and then we'll be back in about 20 minutes. So with that, hello, hi Polly, hi everybody else. I don't know if you guys, Alicia, did you guys get your rooms? Hello, Jade. Hi. Hello. Hi. I'm gonna ask you to unmute.
Yes, I made a mistake. Instead of going into a room, I left this whole thing.
Ah, okay, no problem, no problem. I'm gonna go into the breakout room now. I'm gonna just assign you to go to one. You just have about 10 more minutes to go in it. So I'm gonna assign you, yeah, to go to.
Fine. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry for this.
No problem, no problem. You should be getting something soon. Dr. Hamilton, how are you? I'm gonna ask you to mute. Sorry, here you go. I'm gonna ask you to mute. Unmute. You see the message? Yeah, there you are. Yeah.
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
We're doing well. We're doing well. We're just in breakout rooms right now, so you know.
Okay.
Yeah, where people are just discussing some of the things that they've heard. I'm happy to have you join one of those.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can see the last couple minutes of the conversation. Does that sound good to you?
That sounds fine to me.
Okay, wonderful.
I'm late.
No problem.
Really wanted to see this.
No problem. You should see a message. Time is up. Time is up. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome. It's like traveling to space from one room to the other without no gas needed, no planes needed, no train, no boat, no burik pour nous même qui en Haïti. Nous, pas de besoin là. We didn't need much to travel to get us back, right? So welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Turning it over. I'm gonna unmute everyone. So if you have some noise going, you can unmute yourself, because I'm gonna unmute everyone now so you can have a chance to see. So you can unmute yourself, Kai. You should be able to unmute yourself by yourself now. No?
Okay. Okay, everybody's back.
Yeah.
Yeah, we give thanks for that. I hope that you all had some stimulating conversation and made some links and networks, and hope that you all have something you could submit to CRCP 2020 Plus. I see that big smile on your face, Rita. So, right, in St. Croix. So think about that. We have, you search us on the internet and you'll find all the information, right? So for CRCP 2020, I think it says 2020, 2021, right? The link.
Yeah.
So, or get in touch with one of us if you want to.
2020 plus, yes.
Yes, and I think the website part doesn't have that part, but that's what we're calling it, 2020 plus.
Yeah.
Right. So we're the final piece, we want to remind you about the CanpaTalk tomorrow, which is on Indigenous healing in the Caribbean. So, you know, we had Cuba, we had Haiti, we had Jamaica today, and we're gonna have Jamaica, Trinidad, Suriname, and the USVI tomorrow. So it's looking to be very diverse once again, and some very interesting experiences and from our colleagues around the Caribbean, Dutch speaking, English speaking, we got Spanish speaking, French speaking, so we're representing, right? So don't forget, same time, 5:30 Eastern Standard Time, and we go till 7:30, and we'll have our other co-chair, Maya, who is from Suriname. She'll be moderating that session tomorrow. So we're gonna leave you with one final thing, at least our little video that we're very, very proud of. That's very, 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 very Canpa-like. And I use Canpa-like because a lot of times we separate the English Caribbean with everything we separate. And part of Canpa's mission has been always to include all the different languages in the Caribbean. So we're very proud of this video. Take a listen. We're very glad to have you. We thank you for coming. I know we'll see a lot of you tomorrow. So walk good.
We just, as I pull this video up, wanted just to say a special thank you to Kai for moderating us this evening. Really, truly is wonderful, Kai, for the work that you do in the region. We are so incredibly grateful for Jamaican Psych Association, who hosted the last CanpaTalk, the last CRCP conference, and really wonderful that you were able to host this evening as well. So with that, I'm gonna play you the last video.
Despite racial injustice, door mensen veroorzaakte rampen en natuurrampen.
Nanga na fas fa de wan broko kulturu nanga fos tentresi,
nous camper ensemble avec force qui fait valer nous.
We are CanPA. Juntos somos
Samen zijn wij Campa.
We na CanPA.
Nous c'est Campa.
Muchas gracias.
Okay.
All right. Thanks again. Special thanks to the speakers. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I think everybody was stimulated. And thanks again, Gerda, the whole team, our team of CanpaTalks team, Rita. Who else? I see everybody. Everybody. All right. Take care. See you tomorrow.
Good night, everybody. Thank you for
All right.
joining us. Thank you.
Bye.
Stopping the recording.